seriously popular.
I'm Caroline Cheetham.
And I'm Liz Hull.
In today's episode of the trial of Lucy Letby, Baby K, we bring you the verdict: guilty. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome to episode 7, Guilty Again.
Lucy Letby,
a nurse trusted with the lives of newborn babies,
guilty of killing
today
7 newborn children and attempting to murder 6 more.
A retrial on a charge the last jury couldn't reach a verdict on.
Lucy Letby is a child killer. Last year, she was convicted of murdering 7 babies and trying to murder 6 more when she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England.
She was sentenced to spend her life in jail.
She's now back in court to face a retrial on one charge the jury could not reach a verdict on.
The alleged attempted murder of a premature baby girl known as Baby K.
In this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby, Baby K.
Words cannot effectively explain how we are feeling at this moment in time. To lose a baby is a heartbreaking experience that no parent should ever go through. But to lose a baby and then learn of the harm that was inflicted under these circumstances is unimaginable. Over the past 7 to 8 years, we have had to go through a long, torturous and emotional journey twice.
Those are the words of the family of Baby K, which were read on the court steps by a senior police officer after Lucy Letby was found guilty of attempting to kill their baby daughter less than 2 hours after she was born. Her mum and dad have sat with quiet dignity through every day of this trial, just as they sat with quiet dignity through every day of the previous trial, when the jury then could not reach a verdict.
But this time it took this jury just over 3 hours to decide that Lucy Letby did try to kill their baby daughter by dislodging her breathing tube as she lay helpless in the neonatal unit after being born 15 weeks premature. Here's more of what her parents had written for Detective Inspector Andrea Price to read out on their behalf today.
From losing our precious newborn and grieving her loss, to being told years later that her death or collapse might be suspicious, nothing can prepare you for that news. Today, justice has been served, and a nurse who should have been caring for our daughter has been found guilty of harming her. But this justice will not take away the extreme hurt, anger and distress that we've all had to experience. It also does not provide us with an explanation as to why these crimes have taken place. We are heartbroken, devastated, angry and feel numb. We may never truly know why this happened.
So it was at 11:27 a.m. today when the jury retired to consider their verdict. And it was at exactly 3 o'clock when we were called back into Court 7. And we knew quite quickly this was going to be a verdict. Liz, you were in the courtroom. I was in the annex a few doors away in another court. And it was really tense across the building.
Yes, those moments are always tense. I don't think you're human if you don't have butterflies in your stomach because, the stakes are so high. And when that guilty verdict was announced, the dad of Baby K held his head in his hands and became tearful. His wife also broke down and sobbed. They've been through 2 trials and waited years for this verdict, so there's really no surprise that they were upset and somewhat relieved that they'd finally got justice for their daughter. But Lucy Letby didn't really show any emotion. She remained pretty stony-faced in her seat in the dock. One of the female members of the jury also dabbed away tears.
So then it was all pretty quick. The judge, Mr. Justice Goss, told Lucy Letby she would now face a sentencing hearing on Friday this week, when a victim impact statement from the mother of Baby K will be read to the court. Then he told the prison officers in the dock standing next to Lucy Letby to take her down.
So before we tell you Baby K's story and the detail of how she was attacked by Lucy Letby 3 times in her short life, we just wanted to tell you something we've been unable to mention till now. that Lucy Letby was originally charged with the murder of baby Kay, because we know she died just a few days after being transferred to Arrow Park Hospital after those attacks. That charge was reduced to attempted murder before the original trial began, and that's the guilty verdict this jury in the retrial has handed down today.
Yeah, we also wanted to remind you that detectives are still reviewing what they say are around 4,000 babies that Lucy Letby cared for at the Countess of Chester Hospital and at Liverpool Women's Hospital, where she trained. This conviction today is significant because it could pave the way for more charges.
Last year, we recorded an interview with the main prosecution expert witness, Dr. Dowie Evans, after the original trial. We ran his interview in episode 63 of our original series, and he told us then that just like she did in baby Kay's case, Lucy Letby experimented with dislodging the breathing tubes of babies on the unit before she began murdering babies in June 2015.
Yeah, he told us he'd assessed the cases of 80 children and found that around 10 of them not involved in either this trial or the original trial could have had their breathing tubes tampered with. This is what he told us back in episode 63 of the original podcast series.
I found several cases that are highly suspicious where an endotracheal tube, which is a tube you place in the baby's throat when they need breathing support, had been displaced, had come out. Now, these tubes can come out accidentally, but for so many to come out is very, very unusual. And I suspect that these tubes were displaced intentionally.
And remember, Cheshire Police are also investigating the hospital for corporate manslaughter and the public inquiry into how Lucy Letby was allowed to remain on the neonatal unit, even though doctors had concerns and had taken those concerns to hospital managers repeatedly. That's due to start in September.
We'll take a quick break there. So we know that baby Kay was tiny. She weighed just 692 grams, not even the weight of a bag of sugar when she was born 15 weeks early in February 2016. Now, on the morning before she was born, her mum had been getting ready for work as normal, but she didn't feel quite right. Nothing specific, nothing to panic about. But then she had some bleeding. So she rang her midwife, who advised her to go into hospital, and her local one was the Countess of Chester.
It was clear after she was examined that she was in labour. The doctors tried to stop the labour from progressing, and they tried in vain to find a bed in a specialist unit for her, one that was set up to care for very premature babies, a level 3 centre. But the nearest bed was in Preston, and the doctors were worried that the baby would be born in the back of an ambulance on the motorway.
So they stayed at Chester, and in the early hours of the following morning at 2:12 a.m. on February the 17th, 2016, baby Kay was born. Now, she had to be helped to breathe. She was really fragile, but she was doing well. A tube was immediately placed into her airway, and she was put on a ventilator and admitted to Nursery 1, which we now know was the intensive care room in the neonatal unit.
But what no one knew then was that working on the unit in the nurseries was a killer, a neonatal nurse who, by that point, had already murdered 5 children and tried to kill 3 more. She would later go on to kill 2 more baby boys, 2 brothers from a set of triplets who were killed on consecutive shifts, and attempt to murder another 3.
So this is what Nick Johnson KC told the jury as he opened this case less than 3 weeks ago.
Lucy Letby, as you know, is charged with a single offence of attempted murder. But as all of you, or I'm sure most of you know already, there was a very long trial when Lucy Letby was convicted of 7 murders and 7 counts of attempted murder. 6 others she attempted to murder, 1 of them twice. So that makes 13 children, and here we are dealing with a baby called baby Kay, who's the 14th. Putting it in a nutshell, we say that her status as a multiple murderer and attempted murderer is an important piece of evidence that you can, if you wish, take into account when you're considering whether we have made you sure that she attempted to murder baby Kay.
So back to February 2016 and to Lucy Letby's attack on baby Kay. We now know that within 2 hours of her birth, Lucy Letby had dislodged her breathing tube. She did it when another nurse left the nursery to update her parents about her condition. Lucy Letby took over looking after baby Kay. She silenced the alarms on the incubator and she watched for at least 30 seconds as baby Kay's oxygen started to plummet after she dislodged their breathing tube.
She was only stopped when Dr. Ravi Jayaram, the lead consultant on the ward, walked in. He wanted to know what was happening. Lucy Letby said, "I think she's desaturating," but she was doing nothing to help her. She told Dr. Jayaram she was waiting for baby Kay to self-correct, but he intervened, gave her some rescue breaths, and she picked up. Her breathing tube was replaced, and she stabilised.
What we now know is the reason he walked into Nursery 1 in the first place that morning was because he was uncomfortable about Lucy Letby being in there alone. And that's because he was already suspicious of her. He and his colleagues had begun linking her to collapses and deaths of babies on the unit. And they'd already told managers of their concerns, but they said they were being ignored. And actually, Liz, this verdict today is a vindication in a way for Dr. Jayaram. He's worked at the Countess for more than 20 years. We know he's appeared regularly on daytime TV shows talking about children's health. And we know the jury in the original trial couldn't reach a verdict on this case, but they have now, which means they believed him and they believed that he saw what he said he saw.
Yeah, Caroline, he was given a really tough time in the witness box by Ben Myers, Lucy Letby's defence barrister, who essentially accused him of lying. He said his account was frankly unbelievable because he didn't report what he saw to police or management at the time. And we know his evidence was also called ridiculous and incredible. And we also heard before this trial even started, Mr. Myers tried to get the case thrown out on the grounds that it had been reported in the press that Dr. Jayaram was in talks to be a consultant on a TV drama being made by Jed Mercurio about Lucy Letby. And we've got no idea if this is true, and Dr. Jayaram hasn't spoken about it. But we know the prosecution and the defence both said he was the star witness and that the outcome of this trial hinged on whether the jury believed what he said he saw.
And we should say that, of course, Ben Myers is just doing his job. You know, he's defending Lucy Letby, and before this trial started, nearly 3 weeks ago now, on a Wednesday, on the Monday and the Tuesday of that week, of course, we were sitting in court and there were many, many legal arguments. For various reasons, legal arguments were taking place over those days. And, you know, Ben Myers was doing his job to try to say that Lucy Letby essentially couldn't get a fair trial partly because of the previous convictions that are obviously very well known, partly because those convictions were going to be allowed to be revealed to this jury that had been ruled by that point as well. He thought that was prejudicial, and partly because he said that the evidence that Dr. Ravi Jayaram was going to give was also prejudicial, and he'd proved previously it was prejudicial because he'd given interviews to ITV and he'd spoken at length about how that night and the incident with baby Kay had left him traumatised. So in no way are we criticising the process. Ben Myers was doing his job by defending his client, but it's right that he did try to stop that evidence being put before the court because he said it was prejudicial. But both the defence and the prosecution, as we said, Liz, agreed that whatever Ravi Jayaram said to the jury was going to be really significant. And we know, of course, that he was right. She had attacked baby Kay and she'd been caught almost red-handed doing that by Dr. Jayaram. And what we now know is that later on that night, she attacked baby Kay twice more before she finished her shift. Once at 6:15 in the morning and then again at around 7:30 when the night nurses were handing over to the day shift. And the allegation made in court on those two incidents was that she'd pushed the breathing tube in further than it should have been, around 20% further than it should have been. And what they said was this wasn't in an attempt to kill her, but for a very different reason.
Yeah, she did this to cover her tracks. It was said that both times she pushed the tube further into baby K's airway to make it appear that she was a baby who was routinely dislodging her own breathing tube and was therefore vulnerable to collapse.
So in the end, baby K was only on the unit at the Countess of Chester for 11 hours before she was moved to the more specialist unit at Arrow Park Hospital on the Wirral. Sadly, she died there, aged just 4 days old. Now, here's what Nicola Wynne Williams said today about Lucy Letby's calculating and cold-blooded attempts to murder baby K. She is the Crown Prosecution Service's chief prosecutor in this case.
Lucy Letby has continually denied that she tried to kill this baby or any of the babies that she's been convicted of murdering or attempting to murder. The jury has heard all of the detailed evidence, including from Letby in her own defence, and then formed their own view. Our case involved direct evidence from the doctor who walked into the nursery to find a very premature baby desaturating, with Letby standing by, taking no action to help or to raise the alarm. She deliberately dislodged the breathing tube in an attempt to kill her. Staff at the unit had to think the unthinkable, that one of their own was deliberately harming and killing babies in their care. Letby dislodged the tube a further 2 times over the following few hours in an attempt to cover her tracks and suggest that the first dislodgement was accidental. These were the actions of a cold-blooded, calculated killer. Our thoughts remain with the family of baby K and the countless others affected by Letby's crimes.
And that's really it for now in terms of criminal cases Lucy Letby's facing. Her appeal against her convictions was dismissed in May after that 3-day hearing at the Royal Courts of Justice in London. And unless she's charged with further offences, she won't actually be back in a courtroom after Friday when Mr Justice Goss will sentence her for the attempted murder of baby K. But that will be the last time she's in a courtroom.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll be interesting, won't it, to see whether she comes up from the cells to hear about her punishment, her sentencing, because you'll remember back in August when she was convicted of murdering or harming 13 babies, she refused in the end to come up into the dock and listen to not just the sentencing, a sentence she was going to get from Mr Justice Goss, but also, more importantly really, those incredibly powerful victim impact statements from the parents of the children. So we'll see whether she decides on Friday to come up and hear the remarks that he's going to give, and whether she'll hear the remarks that the parents of baby K are going to say.
Yeah, but interestingly, Caroline, that's not to say that Lucy Letby hasn't heard those sentencing remarks from last August, because what we can now tell you is about a pretty dramatic moment that happened in the court before the jury had been sworn in this case, when the judge was listening to those legal arguments that we touched on earlier from the barristers. Mr Myers, like we said earlier, was trying to get the charge of attempted murder thrown out, dismissed. He said it was impossible for Lucy Letby to get a fair trial because of what he called the overwhelming and irremediable prejudice caused by the volume of publicity and what he said was the utterly hostile media coverage in the aftermath of her first convictions.
Yeah, he highlighted what he called the anti-Letby PR campaign, which he said was instigated by senior police officers from Cheshire Police. He said they'd referred to Lucy Letby as evil, cool, devoid of emotion, beige in interviews with journalists. Now, Mr Myers also described the police's revelation that they were reviewing 4,000 babies that she'd cared for over her career as deeply prejudicial. He also said the comments made by the senior lawyers from the Crown Prosecution Service and, crucially, he said the key prosecution witness in this case, Dr. Jayaram, who gave that ITN interview. He described those comments as utterly wrong and avoidable.
But Mr Johnson disagreed, and he insisted that the media coverage following those verdicts was a fair reflection of the case. And, you know, we're coming to that really dramatic moment now, because what Mr Johnson then did was he spent 7 minutes reading out the sentencing remarks of Mr Justice Goss to the court to demonstrate just how the judge himself had highlighted how Lucy Letby's crimes were appalling and without precedent. So despite her refusal to come up from the cells last time to hear those comments, this time as they were read, she had no choice but to listen to them. So she heard how she'd caused lifelong harm psychological trauma and enduring grief to the parents of the babies because of what Mr. Justice Goss called her calculation, cunning and murderous intent.
So yeah, she's heard the comments from Mr. Justice Goss, but she's never heard the comments of the families in the previous trial. And we'll see on Friday if she comes into court to hear what the parents of baby K say about the impact her death has had on their lives. We'll be back, of course, with that sentencing hearing on Friday. And we're going to leave the final words today to the senior investigating officer in this case, Detective Chief Inspector Nicola Evans.
I hope today's verdict allows baby K's parents and their wider family to try and move forward from what has been a very difficult time. Cheshire Constabulary will continue to support them in the coming months as they come to terms with what has happened here today.
As promised, you can now listen back to all the episodes from our original trial podcast because they're all now back online.
You can read my reports in the mail and also follow us on X at The Trial Podcast or contact us on the trial at mailmetromedia.co.uk.
You can leave a comment on Spotify or send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 07796 657 512. Start your message with the word trial.
See you then.